Another great Ingmar Bergman movie. This one is Through a Glass Darkly from 1961. What is this about? Why do I think this is quite a good movie? Let me tell you coming up next. Through a Glass Darkly comes from the Bible, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the great discourse on love. And that's important for a movie which is about mental illness. Here we have, 1961, we're dealing with a woman's schizophrenia, her delusions, and she's at a cottage by the sea with three men. Three different kinds of men for her: a father, a husband, and a brother. And I suppose those are the three sort of central relationships or main relationships a woman can have if any of those three are in her life. It's a movie with only four characters and in a classic Bergman setting during the summer or spring, where it's right by the sea. The water, the fluid dynamic water, meets the edge of the land, which is stable. He loves to do this, or has loved to do this, the last 15 years of his film career up to this point in 1961. Summer Interlude, a movie about a woman by the sea at a cottage, Summer with Monica. But then, of course, The Seventh Seal, which begins and ends right where the land meets the sea. And again, you have the same actors from The Seventh Seal in this very movie. And the movie will harken back to over and over again The Seventh Seal. But here we're in the 20th century, and this is more like a classic short story in this sort of medieval allegory like The Seventh Seal is. The movie focuses on all the relationships between all the characters, and I suppose the first one we can mention is Karen, this woman who has gotten out of a mental hospital. She feels quite good. In the beginning, you don't know what's going on with her, but later we learn she's had mental illness. And then later in the movie, we'll see her go upstairs in this cottage, talk to the wall. The wall will whisper to her. She thinks she's hearing the voice of God. Each of the three men struggle with Karen's mental illness in different ways. Her father nearly commits suicide. He wants to escape, I think. Her brother really struggles with the father. Minos struggles with David. And then her husband was really struggling as well. This is a very typical Bergman thing to do, to have the men sort of not have a clue as to how to handle a woman. Now, in a lot of early Bergman movies, it's been, in fact, the opposite way. The women struggle with men who are struggling mentally. This one may be the opposite of that, and yet the bare fact is men usually can't relate to women and vice versa in Bergman movies. And here we're talking about a subject, mental illness. Bergman loves to bring up personal health issues, whether it's with reproductive systems, whether it's with mental illness or some kind of psychological problem. And he's been doing that for the last 15 years. Here you've got mental illness as the major dominant idea in the movie, and the thing that all the people have to grapple with in it. And it's just brutally hard. So he wants to show that as a serious social topic that needs to be addressed. I think from the point of view of the 21st century, maybe in America or Europe or other places, this movie might not seem like it's doing that much work with mental illness. We've seen a lot of mentally ill characters in movies, a lot of movies about social work and the needs to recognize mental illness as an important sort of social health problem. But this movie, I don't think it's got much background or backdrop to really talk about a public mental illness which needs therapy and which needs social workers or therapists or a mental sort of hospital where this character, Karen, can get treatment. These characters struggle with the very fact, because I think in Sweden, maybe elsewhere at the time, it's just not as acknowledged in public that mental illness is a problem. So here this movie is talking about it. And then Through a Glass Darkly, the men want to love her, but they don't know how to love her. She thinks she's in communion with God. Meanwhile, the other characters struggle with, does God exist? A typical Bergman problem for a lot of characters. I think that this movie is different from Bergman's other movies in his filmography, at least up to this point, because everything you see in this feels like it's natural, and the camera just wanders on to the scene and captures these people. A lot of Bergman movies feel like they're theatrical productions, very scripted, and the actors sort of know where they're supposed to be, and it feels like a production. I think all of his movies, but this one feels like it's just happening in front of us. So kudos to all the actors, but really the cinematography and the filming of this and the soundscape, with almost no music besides Bach, I think, is absolutely wondrous. And in fact, the cinematography is really rich and interesting. You have the outside or exterior shots by the water, by the sea, the cottage by the sea. But they have this haunting interior. And I think that interior-exterior split obviously is supposed to talk about the characters like Karen. And on the outside, she looks normal. On the inside, she's messed up, or her interior is haunted and shadowy and gothic, kind of like the interior of this cottage. On the exterior, you have a beautiful setting, but the interior is this haunting, as I said, shadowy place. It's a place where, she hears whispers and secrets inside her head. She does that in the room as well upstairs. So you go out onto the sea, and it may be natural and beautiful and wonderful, as the opening sort of shots indicate. But by the end, this exterior-interior split has caused all kinds of problems. And characters like the men here can't get inside Karen to fix her, help her, to change her. And they just struggle with the world of the exterior without really knowing the interior. This movie is quoted frequently by Andrei Tarkovsky, who loved Bergman, one of his two favorite directors, Robert Bresson and Ingmar Bergman. And there's a shot here of the characters inside a ship's hull with water leaking down over. And, Tarkovsky loves the image of indoor leaks or water pouring down on the characters inside a house. And here it's associated with leakiness, mental illness maybe, is the brain not working, and the water coming down is like, the brain not firing on all cylinders, as it were. And I think that's what's going on in this particular scene, especially like a leaky relationship as well. Our love leaks out, and we can't keep hold of it, and we got to keep rekindling it. But when you're mentally ill, I don't know who you are or how to deal with you. These kinds of issues come up with just this wonderful imagery. And it should be said, this movie becomes the first movie in Bergman's Faith trilogy, a trilogy you can get from the Criterion Collection. As the first movie, well, it's loosely related to all the others, but the questions are, does God still speak to us today? If he does, how does he do it? Does God even exist, period? How do I know whether he exists? And every single character in their own sort of ex-Protestant or existential way deals with the question, what does God have to do with my life? And here in this movie, it's a question of why would God allow mental illness? And how do you know when someone is really in communion with God or believing in God sincerely, or whether they're just mentally ill? This movie brings up all of those questions, and especially from the point of view of an outsider, one with a close relationship, like a husband or a father or a brother, and yet even that close relationship, you can't know someone that well in their interior. This point that we're all beings isolated in our own bodies, and we can't sort of communicate to each other what we experience ourselves. All of these horrible, haunting, existential questions come up here, and they're part, certainly, of the Faith trilogy, which includes the next two movies that Bergman makes, Winterlight and The Silence. What do you think of this movie? Let us know in the comments, and please subscribe to this channel for more great content. Thank you, and have a great day.